Hello, this is Mike from Urban Legends and Mythology. Today we are discussing the little known world of gemstones and diamonds, what they are, where they came from, and how they went on to influence significant events in history. So, if you're familiar with that old adage, a diamond is a girl's best friend, well, that ain't no joke. A diamond is of course a girl's best friend, because guys, and I'm speaking to my 71% male audience here in this segment, there are statistically 3 major purchases that you're going to make in your life. Your first major purchase is going to be your house. Your second major purchase is going to be your car. And your third major purchase is going to be that diamond engagement ring. And that doesn't even factor in all the diamond jewelry you're going to be buying for every major holiday after that for the rest of your life. Or if you're like me, you'll purchase it for every holiday for about 6 years and then get divorced and never see any of that money or those precious stones ever again. But inevitably, you will buy that diamond engagement ring. And when you go into the jeweler to buy that ring, it's best if you know what you're doing. You gotta know the 4 C's: color, cut, clarity, and carat. It's also important if you understand the faults and the inclusions and know how to spot those. Essentially, this is going to keep you from overpaying for a cheap, crappy diamond. And there is one often overlooked thing that you want to also look for when purchasing your diamond. You want to look at its provenance or its history. You want to know the mine that it was found in, if that information exists. You want to know the country of origin. You also want to know who's bought, owned, and sold that diamond over the years, and you might even want to dig into the history of those buyers and sellers. But be warned that when you do look into the history of your new potential diamond, you are going to inadvertently uncover the status of the little known and often forgotten 5th C, cursed. And yes, you heard that right, cursed, because while diamonds have played a significant role in a lot of human history, they've also seen a lot of dark history and have directly influenced a lot of dark history. So sit back, have a beer. Today I am enjoying a delicious bottle of Elysian Space Dust. It's a very delicious IPA, and I wish I had more of it because it's so hit or miss when I find it here in southeastern Ohio. But when I do find it, I grab it as fast as I see it. But as I drink this, I'm going to tell you the stories of the 5 most notorious cursed diamonds in the world. So to kick it off, I'm going to start with my favorite story about my absolute favorite diamond in the world, the infamous Black Orlov. So the story with this particular diamond, also known as the Eye of Brahma, actually starts about 1 billion years ago. And for context, you also have to understand that black diamonds are extremely rare. They only naturally occur in like 3 parts of the world. And that's because they're generally believed to have been created by meteor impacts. And while they are still considered a diamond, they're technically geologically in this different category known as a carbonado, which gives it its black look. And what's even crazier is they're not even found in like kimberlite deposits, which are where you normally go for finding diamonds. They're found in metamorphic deposits, so they're this really strange kind of diamond. And to be honest, in their basic, uncut, unpolished form, they actually kind of look like a lump of coal. So this was an exceedingly rare, black, uncut, 195 carat diamond, which somehow before the 19th century makes its way to India via trade routes. And in India, it is used as one of the eyes in a statue to their creation god Brahma, and that stone rests in the eye of that shrine for probably several years until one day a wandering Jesuit monk comes in. And this wandering Jesuit monk, he was a pretty terrible character because when he saw that diamond in that statue, he knew he had to have it. So one night after the shrine had closed to the public, he snuck back in. And this greedy little monk, he wandered over to the statue of Brahma and with his grubby little disgusting hands reached up and pried that diamond right out of the statue of Brahma. Now, to be perfectly honest, no matter what your religious affiliation is, it's probably not a good idea to desecrate the statue of the Hindu god of creation. And karma, being the bitch that it is, quickly caught up with this monk, because when Brahma Obama found out what happened to his statue, he cursed that diamond and anyone who would hold it. And it only took a few days for those people to track down and murder that greedy little Jesuit monk who had desecrated their great shrine. However, unfortunately for them, they were unable to retrieve the diamond that he had stolen because it was already making its way through the trade routes to Russia. So we don't hear much about what happens to the diamond up until about the turn of the 20th century when it shows up in Russia, and it's in the possession of a Russian princess named Nadia Vigene Orlov, and this is where the infamous diamond gets its name. And she most likely gets a hold of this diamond because she was actually the wife of a Russian jeweler. However, the early 20th century isn't the best time to be a Russian royal, because as we know, the early 20th century would culminate in the downfall of the Russian monarchy, and by 1917 the Russian Revolution was in full swing. So during that year, Princess Nadia fled Russia for the safety of Rome, and it was sometime after this when Nadia and her husband end up selling the diamond to a European diamond dealer named J.W. Paris. And it's said that immediately after J.W. Paris took possession of this diamond, his business began to fail, and he developed a severe case of anxiety. So in 1932, he makes his way to the United States, and while in Manhattan, he finds a buyer, and he sells the Black Orlov to this new buyer. However, after he sells this diamond, his business completely collapses. So with his life in ruins and his business in shambles, all he can think to do is to throw himself off of a New York City skyscraper about a year after he sold the Black Orlov. And remember our princess who's living in Rome? Well, she lives out the rest of her life miserably, and she leapt to her death off of a building in central Rome in what was believed to have been a suicide. However, by 1950, the diamond ends up in the possession of a jeweler named Charles F. Winson. And already by this time, he is aware of this curse which is associated with this diamond, and he decides that he's going to break this curse. And the way he decides to break this curse is to simply cut this diamond into 3 different pieces. So after he does his little curse-breaking surgery, we see the Black Orlov as we know it today. It is a 67.5 carat cushion-cut diamond. The stone is then set into a 108 carat diamond and platinum brooch, and that brooch is suspended from a 108 carat diamond and platinum necklace. It is one of the most impressive and beautiful pieces of jewelry in existence, and to this day it remains the 7th largest black diamond in the world. Now, the other pieces, we don't really know what happened to them. They were cut down into smaller diamonds and probably recut and put in jewelry that's all over the world now. But it is said that after the Black Orlov was cut that the curse was broken, and it's actually after about 1950, after this diamond was cut down this last time, when we actually have some really good provenance of the history since then. In 1969, it was sold at auction for about $300,000, which when you adjust that for inflation today, that's a hell of a lot of money. In 1990, it was auctioned at Sotheby's and it sold for $99,000 to an unknown buyer. They, in turn, on October 11th of 2006, auctioned the diamond again, this time at Christie's Magnificent Jewels, and it was sold for $352,000 or $5,214 per carat. The diamond now rests in a private collection, but we actually don't know who actually owns it because it was anonymously bought. Now, I've heard rumors that it's currently owned by this Hollywood jewelry dealer and he doesn't have any intention on ever selling it. But if he ever did sell it today, it could fetch upwards of like $1.9 million. And as far as we know today, the curse has never returned. However, if it ever does and that dude wants to get rid of it quickly, he can reach out to me. I'll give him my personal mailing address. I mean, I could really use $1 million diamond. Hell, he can call it a donation to the podcast fast and use it as a tax write-off. But while we're on the subject of diamonds in Hollywood, that actually brings us to our next subject, the Moon of Baroda. And while the name might not sound familiar to you, I bet a lot of you are familiar with this diamond because it is the diamond that Marilyn Monroe wore during the filming of the 1953 film Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And if you're like me and you spent most of that film just staring at her chest, then you are very familiar with that diamond. So without further ado, this is the story of the Moon of Baroda. So like all diamonds, this diamond starts out its journey in a mine, and in this case it was found in a diamond mine in Golconda, India, which is a world famous region for diamonds. This region is known for superbly luminous, transparent, and innately pure crystal-like diamonds. Now, it was originally found sometime between the 15th and 17th centuries, and in its natural rough form, it weighed in at 25.95 carats, so this is a pretty big diamond. The Baroda is a diamond of extremely high clarity, and it contains nitrogen, which gives it this beautiful yellow hue. Now, when it comes to diamond grading laboratories, they give yellow diamonds 5 different classifications: faint, light, fancy, intense, and vivid. And the Moon of Baroda falls in that classification of a fancy colored yellow diamond. So this yellow diamond, it makes its way to the city of Baroda, where it gets its namesake. It is then cut down to a pear shape of 24.04 carats and is essentially set into the headpiece, or what we would call today a crown, that belonged to kind of the local Maharajas. They were called the Gaekwads. And yes, I know I most likely pronounced that name wrong, but I'm an American, so I don't care. But they were a very powerful and influential dynasty of Maharajas who for over 2 centuries ruled much of the western country that is now centered around the modern state of Gujarat. And the Moon of Baroda remained in the possession of this family up until the mid-1700s. Now here's the thing about the Moon of Baroda, which is why I'm discussing it today, because it is said that if this diamond were to ever cross over water or cross seas, that it would bring unprecedented bad luck to the wearer. And this is exactly what it did. So at some point during the mid-1700s, the stone was gifted to Empress Marie Therese of Austria of the Habsburg dynasty. Now, 2 interesting things about Marie Therese of Austria. She was the only female empress in the entire Habsburg dynasty, and she was also mother to Marie Antoinette being her youngest daughter. So I think you can see where we're going with this, because not only did she have a very tumultuous reign filled with bad luck, strife, political instability, and almost constant war, but her youngest daughter is the one who is essentially scapegoated for all of France's problems which arise during the French Revolution, generally just because of her love of the finer things in life, fine jewelry and fancy hair or whatever, and she meets a very ghastly end. And a lot of people believed that it was bad luck brought on by the Moon of Baroda, which led to the tumultuous reign of Marie Therese, as well as her daughter's death, political strife in Europe, and ultimately her own death. So upon the Empress's death, the Habsburgs actually send this diamond back to India, to the Gaekwads, the family who's owned this diamond forever, and in the 1860s it was actually mounted in a pendant and remained in its native India for several decades up until the 1920s, and while it was in India in its home, there was no bad luck associated with it. And in 1920 it is said to have been sold to an unknown buyer, and by the 1940s it had made its way to the United States, crossing water once again. And it ends up eventually being bought by this firm of diamond cutters in Cleveland, Ohio, and in 1953 it actually goes to auction. It was sold to a man named Meyer Rosenbaum, who at the time was the president of Detroit's Meyer Jewelry Company. So Rosenbaum gets a hold of this diamond, and he does something which is considered extremely controversial and insane at the time, but by today, looking back, it was a stroke of genius. Instead of embedding it in a tiara or putting it in some beautiful necklace studded with diamonds or whatever, he decides to simply suspend it from a leather cord. That's it. It's essentially this basic leather choker with this insane diamond hanging from it, and it is so elegant in its simplicity that it becomes kind of the model for simple elegance. Basically, it's that idea of you don't need to embed it in a crown with like 500 other diamonds or hang it from a necklace with like a bunch of other diamonds. The thing is so stunning that it just stands out on its own, and it makes that statement. And who does he pick at the time to wear and promote this insane, beautiful diamond? Well, none other than the infamous Marilyn Monroe, who wore it for the shooting and the subsequent promotion of the film Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, where she sings that infamous song, "A Diamond is a Girl's Best Friend." And if you look closely in those diamonds that she's wearing, the Muna Bardoa does stand out. And that becomes Monroe's most famous film, and 1953 is considered her breakout year. It is the year where she is on top of the world. However, after this, after taking possession of this diamond and wearing it all over the country and promoting the film and the song and all this stuff, her career starts to falter. Now, to be honest, Marilyn Monroe, she always kind of had a hard luck life. I mean, during her childhood, she was in I think 16 different foster homes and orphanages. And, by the time she's 16, she bounces to Hollywood after working in a factory, and she decides that she's finally going to get her break in the movies. And after a lot of hard times and strife and hard work, she actually does achieve that American dream, and she becomes a movie star and a very iconic sex symbol. She's still a sex symbol to this very day. And by 1953, when she gets possession of the stone, her stardom is at its peak. This was also the same year she did that infamous Playboy shoot and launched Hugh Hefner's empire. However, like I said, after 1954, her career starts to falter. First, she feels like she's being underpaid and typecast as the stereotypical dumb blonde, and she's actually suspended from production for almost a year for refusing a film project, and it basically pissed off the studio she was working for, so they suspended her for a year. And her life just gets worse. She ends up in these disastrous marriages to Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller, and they both end in divorce. And, Joe DiMaggio, he beat the living fuck out of her sometimes. For example, that iconic photo we have when she's standing over that steam grate or whatever, and it blows up and it blows her dress and it looks really awesome. When DiMaggio found out about that photo, he beat the living snot out of her. She became addicted to barbiturates and eventually ends up killing herself on August 4th, 1962 at the age of 36. Now, a lot of people will say, okay, people make their own choices in life, and this was just a tragic life and a series of bad mistakes and circumstances. But let's not forget the subject of the segment. The Muna Bardoa does curse the wearer after crossing water, and it bestows the wearer with bad luck for the rest of its life. So the question has to be asked, was Marilyn Monroe the latest victim of the Muna Bardoa and subsequently this curse? Now, logically, I would say no, that has nothing to do with the tragedy that is Marilyn Monroe's life, but it does make for an interesting, albeit dark story, and that story has made the reputation of this infamous diamond soar. Now, since the 1950s, the Muna Bardoa has only been bought and sold a couple of times. In 1990, it sold at Christie's for $297,000, which was nearly triple what they thought it would go for, with its connection to European royalty and its connection to Marilyn Monroe being huge factors in that final price. Now, the buyer at the time did remain anonymous, and this diamond ends up in their private collection and is not seen in public again until 2008 when it was shown at the Diamond Divas exhibition in Antwerp. It was essentially just put on display for people to gawk at and be like, oh my god, look at that thing, it's beautiful. However, on 27 November 2018, it was sold again. This time it took center stage at the Magnificent Jewels sale at Christie's in Hong Kong, where it sold for $1.3 million to a private collector. It has remained in this private collection ever since, and as far as we know, the current owner hasn't experienced any bad luck. However, like before, if he ever does start to experience bad luck, I can give you my address. I'll take it off your hands. Just remember to write it off on your taxes as a donation. And that brings us to the end of the segment of the Moon of Baroda. Now, that story wasn't as crazy as our first, and it's not as crazy as our following. However, that doesn't diminish the reputation of this awesome diamond. But if you're looking for a diamond with a really insane history, well, you're going to love our next segment. This is the Hope Diamond. Probably the most famous cursed diamond in human history. This thing is infamous, and this is its story. And with this one, we really can start at the beginning because we know its provenance almost all the way back to when it was discovered. And this particular diamond has given scientists a lot of insight into how diamonds are formed through their various studies of this gem. And this very diamond was actually formed 1.1 billion years ago when carbon atoms formed strong bonds with each other, along with trace amounts of boron, which intermixed with the carbon structure, which results in the rare blue color of the diamond. This diamond then spent the next billion years embedded in a kimberlite deposit until the early 1600s when it was discovered within a mine in India. This mine was known as the Kolar Mine. It was in the Guntur district of Andhra Pradesh, which at the time was part of the infamous Golconda Kingdom. And if you remember that name Golconda, that region, that is the region where some of the most beautiful diamonds in the world have come from. And we know that when this diamond was found in its rough form, it weighed 112 and 3/16 old French carats, which roughly translates to about 110 carats. And we do know it remains in its uncut form until at least 1666. And in India, they kind of do have a different mindset on how diamonds should be cut. There's just general belief in some parts of India that a diamond has this way of absorbing negative energy, and therefore the best practice is to keep it in its most rough, uncut shape. Now, they might cut out some inclusions or some cracks or anything like that, but for the most part, they remain largely uncut or just very lightly cut. And it's believed that this diamond was originally placed in the forehead of a statue of the Hindu goddess Sita, and it's believed that this diamond remains in this statue until 1666 when a Frenchman named Tavernier made a trip to India and simply stole it. Now, that is kind of the mythical part of the story, that Tavernier, he stole this diamond and brought it back to France, but the actual history is that one Baptiste Tavernier was a French traveler and gem trader, and through his travels to India and his trading in these precious stones, he comes into possession of this rough uncut diamond, or as he puts it, only slightly finished at the time. And Tavernier, when he gets a hold of this diamond, he is ecstatic. He knows he just hit the jackpot because this is one of the rarest and most beautiful diamonds on the planet. Now, for context, the Hope, or at this time the Tavernier diamond, is a type 2B diamond, which means it has extremely low levels of nitrogen, and this diamond consists of significant levels of boron, which gives it that blue-violet look. And it is said that only 0.01% of diamonds ever found contain these properties. So this is an extremely rare diamond. So Tavernier, he takes this diamond along with all his other gems and diamonds that he collected during this trip, and he goes back to France, and he sells this diamond to King Louis XIV himself for cash, as well as a patent of nobility, which is basically just a document signed by the king that says, I'm making you a nobleman. And Tavernier, he goes on to become a noble. He becomes a very wealthy man, and he continues in his jewel trade. But remember that story where they said that he probably pried it from the goddess statue of Sita? Well, that comes back to haunt him because it is said that in his 84th year, while he is traveling through Russia, one day he is ripped apart by dogs, which was widely believed to be punishment for the theft of that diamond. However, in the meantime, the diamond is in the French royal family. It becomes a centerpiece in the French crown jewels. At first, it's set into a cravat pin in 1674, and then it became a central element in the elaborate Order of the Golden Fleece pendant in 1715. And then in 1775, the Tavernier blue was removed from the fleece and recut by court jeweler Juan Pietu into the 68-carat French blue. The diamond would go on to be handed down through the family, ending up in the hands of Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. And Marie Antoinette, who had this love for fine jewelry, would flaunt the French blue. And as we all know, fate would be unkind to the French royal family, particularly to Marie Antoinette, who would be executed during the French Revolution while in possession of this diamond. And it's kind of funny how Marie Antoinette is actually tied to two cursed diamonds. The Muna Baroda from our last story, which was owned by her mother, the Austrian Empress, who had a very tumultuous reign, and the Hope Diamond, which is said to bring bad luck and misfortune to anyone who owns it. And apparently all this bad luck just centered on France in the latter half of the 18th century. Now, during the Reign of Terror in 1791, the crown jewels, including this blue diamond, were taken from the royal couple after they attempted to flee France in 1791. The jewels were then placed in a royal storehouse known as the Garde Meuble de la Couronne, or however it's said in French, I don't know. However, the storehouse wasn't really well guarded, and between September 12th and September 16th of 1791, this place was continuously raided by people. And while most of the crown jewels were able to be recovered, some of them, including the royal blue or the French blue, were not. That particular diamond made it out of the country, and it soon crossed the English Channel, where it resurfaces in London. Now, the thieves knew that they had a very identifiable, very iconic diamond, so what do they have to do? They have to cut it. And it is cut down into the 45.52 carat diamond that we know today, as well as several other smaller diamonds which make their way across Europe. And a lot of these remnants end up in royal households. The largest remnant, a 7.6 carat stone, is set into the ring of Empress Maria Fedorovna, the wife of Russian Emperor Paul I. It is then given to the Russian State Diamond Fund in 1860 by her daughter-in-law, the Empress Alexandra Fedorova. It was then unmounted from that ring and mounted into a stick pin, and it is preserved in the collection of the Alexander Palace in Sarvilko Solo near St. Petersburg to this very day. However, the remaining 45.52 carat stone turns up in England in 1812, and it is owned by a Daniel Elysian. This is the earliest point in which we can fix a time and a date to the Hope diamond as it exists in this current form. And strangely, it turns up exactly 20 years to the day after the infamous Royal French Blue was stolen. And it's kind of funny because it's on that exact day when the statute of limitations for that crime had expired. It was then said that Ellison sold it to King George IV of England, who after his death, it was later sold in order to pay off the king's gambling debts. And King George IV, he wasn't a very popular king. In fact, the people hated him. He was bad at money. He was bad at portraying his public image. He was considered just this big fat dumb oaf that everybody hated, and he ended up dying in extreme debt. Now, by 1839, it ends up in the Hope family, and this is where the diamond gets its name. It ends up in the hands of a man named Henry Philip Hope, who was one of the heirs of the banking firm Hope & Company. Now, Hope, being a wealthy banker in the early 19th century, he naturally has a large collection of fine art and fine gems, and this diamond becomes kind of the centerpiece of that collection. Now, Henry, he never marries, so after he dies, his fortune is split between his three nephews, and his older nephew, a man named Henry Thomas Hope, he ends up being the one with the diamond. Then he eventually dies, and it ends up in the possession of his widow, who hands it down to her grandchild, and by 1887, it ends up in the hands of Lord Francis Hope. Now, Lord Francis Hope, like all these wealthy aristocrats, he loves spending money on the finer things in life, and he also had a gambling addiction. education, but he was a terrible gambler. So facing all these gambling debts and other various debts from his outrageous spending, he actually asked permission from the court in 1898 to sell the Hope Diamond, but his siblings opposed the sale, so the sale is denied. And in cases like family heirlooms such as the Hope Diamond, you do have say in like whether your brother owns it and he wants to sell it. You can say no, it's a family heirloom, we have to keep it in the family. There are some legal precedents for that. However, he still has all this debt that he can't pay off, so he appeals that court decision and it's denied again. And then finally in 1901, on an appeal to the English House of Lords, he's finally granted permission to sell the diamond. They're basically like, listen, if you shut up about it and pay off your debts, okay, fine, you can sell it. So he sells the diamond for £29,000, which is the equivalent of $3.35 million today. The buyer is a guy named Adolf Weil. He was a London jewel merchant, and he goes on to sell the stone to a diamond dealer named Simon Frankel, who was based in New York City, and it makes its way over to America. And it basically remains in the hands of Frankel until about 1908, when he sells it for $400,000, which is the equivalent of $13 million in today's money. And he sold it to a man named Salomon Habib, a wealthy Turkish diamond collector, reportedly on behalf of Sultan Abdülhamid of the Ottoman Empire. And I won't get into extreme detail, but we all know how the early 20th century went for the Ottoman Empire. It kind of collapsed in 1921. However, it doesn't stay in Habib's possession for very long because it was included in an auction to settle his debts. Basically, his throne was under threat and they needed some quick cash, so it ends up being sold to a Paris merchant for $80,000, which was the equivalent of $2.61 million today. Then by 1910, it ends up in the hands of Pierre Cartier, who tries to sell it to a socialite named Evelyn Wash McLean, and he tells her this awesome, crazy story about this cursed diamond and where it's been and all this stuff. And after he tells her this crazy story about this diamond and its history, he reveals it to her, and she initially rejects the sale. She doesn't want to buy it. However, he goes and has it reset, and it's set in this new modern kind of style, and he presents it to her again, and she loves it. And after this, they finally finalize the sale in 1911, where she pays over $300,000, or the equivalent of $9.4 million for this diamond. And this new setting that he put it in is the current setting we see the diamond in today. It is a platinum framework surrounded by a row of 16 diamonds, which alternated between old mine cut and pear-shaped variants. And when you look at this thing, you can just see the elegance that it exudes, and it said that she goes on to retain this diamond for the rest of her life, and it's after her death when her descendants, they actually sell it to settle some of her debts. And in 1949, the diamond, along with her entire jewelry collection, was bought by a New York jeweler named Harry Winston. And then eventually in 1958, Winston would donate it to the Smithsonian, where it remains today. And it's actually kind of comical how he donated it. He actually sent it through the US mail in a box wrapped in brown paper as simple registered mail. He insured it for $1 million at the cost of $145.29, of which $2.44 was for the postage and the balance insurance. The package arrives at the Smithsonian, it's categorized, and it's put on display to this day, and being in the Smithsonian, it gives scientists a chance to really study this diamond, and it gave us a ton of insight on how diamonds are formed and various things like that. And the following are just some cool facts that we have learned about the Hope Diamond ever since scientists and gemologists have been able to study it. So in December 1988, the Gemological Institute of America's laboratory determined the diamond to weigh 45.52 carats, or 9.104 grams, or 0.3211 ounces. The diamond has been compared in size and shape to that of a pigeon egg or a walnut that is pear-shaped. The length, width, and depth are the following: 25.60 millimeters by 21.78 millimeters by 12 millimeters millimeters, or in freedoms, that's 1 inch by 7/8 of an inch by 15/32 of an inch. While over the years it's been described as everything from violet to grayish blue, the United States Gemological Institute examined the diamond, and using their scale, they graded it as a fancy deep grayish blue. When you put this diamond under shortwave ultraviolet light, it has a glow-in-the-dark effect that persists for some time, and it is a red glow, an intense red glow. And they actually use this methodology nowadays to test whether or not a blue diamond is fake or real, because a fake blue diamond won't have that. The clarity is a VS1 with whitish graining present, and the cut is described as being a cushion antique brilliant with faceted girdle and extra facets on the pavilion. And another thing we learned from the Smithsonian was in the 2010s they actually 3D modeled it and compared it to sketches of the original French blue, and through like CAD modeling and all this computer stuff that I don't understand, they actually determined beyond a shadow of doubt that the Hope diamond was cut from the lost French royal blue diamond. There was no longer any speculation about that. This was the same diamond. Since then, the diamond has been unseated, it's been placed alone, it's been set into necklaces and other stuff within the Smithsonian. However, I believe right now it's in that original setting that Cartier had it in when he sold it. And as far as we know, that the bad luck surrounding the Hope diamond has dissipated since it's been donated to the Smithsonian. The only bad luck I think I can see around it currently is just the general insanity it is to get museums funded in this country, but I digress. Now, so far we mostly focus on diamonds that kind of have just this dubious kind of myth that bad luck surrounds the owners or wearers. However, the next diamond we get into, it actually has a very bloody past in history, because we know for a fact that this diamond has influenced and seen some very insane history, because it seems like every owner of this diamond had some dark or bloody end. This is the story of the Sancy. Now, the Sancy is a 55.23 carat shield-shaped stone without a pavilion, which attests to its extremely old cut. It's an extremely unique diamond in the way that it's cut. It is almost colorless and has a very faint greenish yellow tint. The stone was considered to be the largest white diamond in Europe until the arrival of the Regent diamond in the 17th century. And the stone is well known all across Europe because it has been traded all across Europe throughout most of its history. It has been in the possession of almost every royal family in Europe. It has been pawned to finance wars, and it's because of all this bloody history it's been directly involved with, which gives it that status of cursed. So the Sancy is believed to have been smuggled out of India sometime in the 1300s, and just the very nature of this diamond, it is highly suggested that it was found in that infamous Golconda region of India. But what we do know is the first recorded evidence of the existence of the Sancy in Europe is in the dowry inventory of Valentina Visconti, the daughter of Galeazzo de Visconti, the Duke of Milan. At that time, the diamond was recorded to have weighed over 100 carats, so it has been cut down and reshaped since then. Now, Valentina married the Duke of Orleans, Louis I, who was the brother of King Charles VI and actually acted as his regent until Charles VI came of age at the age of 20. Now, Charles VI was pretty infamous. He was also known as Charles the Mad because he had suffered from psychotic episodes throughout his life, and it was said that he only really functioned about 6 months out of the year before one of these psychotic episodes would take over. However, despite this, he is still king, and upon reaching the age of 20, he is able to rule in his own rights, so he fires his administrative council, including his brother Louis I, as well as the guy who was acting as regent at the time, Philip the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy. Now, pretty much directly due to the fact of the madness of King Charles VI, a lot of these people, including the Duke of Orleans and the Duke of Burgundy, were jockeying for power. The monarchy was seen as very weak at this time, and these two guys, they were basically jockeying to be basically the next king. And it starts this feud which would go on a very long time. However, Philip, the Duke of Burgundy, he actually dies in 1404, and the rivalry is continued with his son, John the Fearless, who was the successor to Philip the Bold. And this leads to the murder of Louis I by agents of John the Fearless in 1407. Immediately after the assassination, a long feud ensued between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians, who were the two factions which represented these two families, and it essentially leads to a civil war. Now, Valentina, who was the wife of Louis I, she was very bitter over her husband's assassination by the Burgundians, and she used the Sancy diamond to obtain funds to finance the struggle by the Armagnac faction against the Burgundians. However, they were defeated, and the Sancy falls into the hands of Duke John the Fearless as a spoil of war. The Sancy then remained with several generations of the Dukes of Burgundy until it reached Charles the Bold, the great-grandson of John the Fearless. Now, Charles the Bold, he believed that the diamond brought good luck to the Dukes of Burgundy, and he carried it into battle on several occasions, which all ended in victories which he attributed to the Sancy. However, that would all change during the Battle of Granson in 1476, where he actually loses the diamond. After this, Charles lost 2 other battles against the Swiss. In the last battle he was ever in at Nancy on January 5th, 1477, he was killed and his mutilated body was discovered some days later. Now, here's the thing. The Sancy wasn't actually lost in battle. It was actually hidden away by a bishop named Bustle, along with another famous jewel, the Three Brothers jewel, which also belonged to Charles the Bold. He hid this away for purposes of safekeeping. However, in reality, he literally stole these gems, because 14 years later, he goes on to sell the Three Brothers jewel to a man named Jacob Fugger, and he also sells the Sancy to the Hertenstein family of Luswain. And later, Fugger is the guy who buys the Sancy from that family, and it's believed that he was the one who actually cut it to its present weight of 55.23 carats. And then in 1495, the Sancy is sold to Manuel the Fortunate, the King of Portugal, who bought it in exchange for exclusivity in the lucrative pepper contract from Portugal's colonies, because we got to remember, pepper is like worth its weight in gold at this time. So having an inside track on this contract where they say, okay, Portugal, you're only going to sell pepper to us, that is a huge financial deal. So the Sancy remains as a part of the Portuguese crown jewels until 1580, when Philip II of Spain invaded Portugal to assert his right as heir to the Portuguese throne against the contender Antonio de Crato, who was defeated and sought refuge in Paris. Now, de Crato, he manages to escape with many of the Portuguese crown jewels, and he's actually selling them off to King Henry III of France and to like Queen Elizabeth I of England in hopes that they would finance his war into regaining his throne. And Elizabeth I of England is the one who ends up buying the Sancy, and it's funny because at the time she buys this jewel, England is already in possession of the Three Brothers, which was acquired by her own brother, the former Edward VI, in 1547, and the two stones were actually reunited for the first time since they were stolen from the former Duke of Burgundy back in 1477, which isn't surprising because when you look at French and British history, a lot of French stuff ends up in England. However, she doesn't keep it long because eventually she pawns the Sancy to fund a military campaign against the Dutch in their struggle for independence from Spain. And to be honest, she never pays on this pawn, so the person that she pawned it to basically resells it, and it turns up in the Netherlands in 1592. It was purchased by Nicholas Harlay de Sancy, where it finally gets its name. Now, Sancy, he was the financier to Henry III and Henry IV of France, so he was the rich dude that the kings borrowed money from when they needed money. And it's funny because one time while he was in London on royal business, Queen Elizabeth actually demanded the diamond back, and he actually politely refused. He basically said, no, I bought this in the Netherlands from a pawnbroker because the pawn was never paid on it. Which, to be honest, he must have had some cojones to tell that to the monarch of England, but then again, she wasn't his queen. So unfortunately for Harley de Sancy, by the beginning of the 17th century, he was in dire financial straits, and he was looking desperately for a customer who would buy the valuable Sancy diamond, and that potential customer actually happens to be Queen Elizabeth's successor, King James I of England. So he buys the jewel in 1604, and it returns to England. So it remains in King James's custody until his death, and then it's passed down to his successor, the infamous Charles I of England, and it was presented to his wife as a wedding gift. However, he ends up pawning it in 1626 in Amsterdam along with other crown jewels because he was in desperate need of funds to pursue his unpopular war efforts against Spain and France. And the thing you gotta know about Charles I was he was a very unpopular king and unliked king. I mean, this was the guy who was engaged in the English Civil War and had his head cut off. He had a disastrous reign. His military campaigns were all disastrous, and he was always in dire financial straits. But in the 1630s, he was actually able to pay off his pawn and redeem the crown jewels along with the Sancy. However, the English Civil War was breaking out, and his wife Henrietta this time pawns the crown jewels again, including the Sancy, and in 1643 from that pawn they were able to purchase a shipload of arms from Holland. So essentially they pawned the English crown jewels for a shipload of arms. However, this is no match for the parliamentarians' new model army, so eventually they get crushed by the parliamentarians and Cromwell and his new model army, and that starts the interregnum. And after Charles' death, his family flees to France, where they're under French protection. And while in France, a Cardinal Mazarin, the Prime Minister of France and regent of King Louis XIV, took over Henrietta's debts and was able to officially redeem the crown jewels of England once again. And with the Queen's consent, he took possession of the gems and bequeathed them and other fine stones to Louis XIV. From Louis XIV, the Sancy passed to Louis XV, who was King of France from 1715 to 1774, and eventually it was passed down to his son, the infamous Louis XVI, who was guillotined during the French Revolution. Now, the Sancy was amongst the stones that were in the royal treasury when it was looted on that date in 1792, along with the French blue, which would become the Hope Diamond. However, it was recovered, it was uncut, and it was sold to the Spanish royal family, and it was said to be in the possession of the Queen of Spain until the arrival of Joseph Bonaparte, who took over the Iberian Peninsula on behalf of his brother Napoleon. And Joseph, he actually takes possession of the Sancy and he hid it along with other treasures without the knowledge of his brother. The stone then reappeared only after 20 years in Florence, after the expiration of the statute of limitations of the theft, just like the Hope Diamond. After this, it was sold to a fabulously rich prince, Anatoly Demidov of Russia. His exceptionally beautiful wife, Aurora, is actually pictured with the Sancy in a portrait hanging in Ekaterinburg. Now, the Sancy remains in Prince Anatoly's possession up until 1865, when he decided to sell it to an Indian entrepreneur, Sir Yamisty Jehiaboy, for £50,000. 2 years later, the stone was displayed by the French jeweler G. Babs at the Paris Exposition with a price tag of 1,000,000 French francs. Then in 1906, the Sancy was purchased by Viscount William Astor, the first Viscount Astor, as a wedding gift for his son Waldorf Astor, the second Viscount Astor, and his wife Nancy, later known as Lady Astor, often wore the big shield-shaped gem in a tiara on state occasions. In 1962, it was featured prominently at the 10 Centuries of French Jewelry exhibition held at the Louvre. When later Astor died in 1964, the Sancy was inherited by her son, the third Viscount Astor, and remained in the Astor family until 1976, until the Louvre finally purchased it for an undisclosed sum. And it remains in the Louvre to this very day, thus completing the insane provenance of this diamond. This diamond probably has the greatest provenance in the history of all diamonds because it is crazy crazy. It went through a documented provenance of over 31 different owners over 587 years. It was financed for war. It was pawned. It saw bloody conflicts. It was on battlefields. It was stolen. It ended up in wealthy households in the hands of kings and princes across 10 different countries, some of which I didn't even mention. The Sancy is the most celebrated stone in history. It has passed through more countries and affected more royal families than any other diamond in human history. It is insane. So it's no surprise to me that it's considered a cursed diamond just due to all the bloody, insane history it witnessed. So I guess if any diamond deserves that moniker of cursed or a bad luck diamond, this would be the running candidate in my opinion. However, we still do have one last diamond to discuss, and this diamond also has a very familiar sounding story. This is the story of the Regent. Now, the Regent diamond, also known as the Pitt diamond, is a 140.615 carat cushion-shaped brilliant grade D pale blue tint diamond with an internally flawless clarity. It is the 7th largest D-color internally flawless diamond in the world and the 2nd largest cushion-shaped D-color diamond in existence. Now, we can trace the origin of this diamond to 1698 when it was discovered by a slave in the alluvial diamond mines of Golconda. When this slave originally found it in its rough form, it was originally 410 carats, and he decides to smuggle the enormous pale blue diamond out of the mines, concealed within the bandages of a self-inflicted wound in his leg, and he sees this as his ticket to buying his freedom and having wealth on the back end. So he smuggles this diamond to the coastal areas where he met an Englishman who was a captain of a ship and offered him 50% of the proceeds of the sale of the stone if he helped him escape the country. Now, the captain obliges and he allows this slave to come aboard his ship, and they decide that they're going to split the money from this sale. So the next day they make their way to Bombay, and while at sea, the captain, he's overcome with greed and he decides that he's simply going to murder this slave and keep the diamond for himself, which he promptly does. He murders him and has his body thrown overboard. After the ship reaches Bombay, the captain found an Indian diamond merchant by the name of Jean Chand and sold him the diamond for about £1,000. Afterward, according to the legend, the captain, in a state of severe depression from the crime, committed suicide by hanging himself. So already within weeks of the discovery, it's already killed 2 people. So in 1702, Jamshad sells the diamond to the British governor of Madras, a guy named Thomas Pitt, for an estimated £20,000. So later, between the years of 1704 and 1706, Pitt got the diamond cut in London by a diamond cutter named Harris. And this cutting process was very precise. It took 2 long years to cut this diamond. However, the end result would be beautiful. Stones from the original rough were actually sold to the Emperor Peter the Great of Russia for about £7,000. However, the large cushion-shaped brilliant cut diamond weighing 140.615 carats was called the Pitt diamond and turned out to be one of the most brilliant and finest diamonds in human history. So later in 1709, Pitt starts looking for buyers for this diamond, and in 1717 he finally sells it for about £135,000 to Philip II, the Duke of Orleans. And I think we all know where we're going with this. It becomes part of the French crown jewels. So in 1723, it was set in the coronation crown of Louis XV, and then in 1775, it was set into the coronation crown of Louis XVI. The diamond was also used as an adornment on the hat of Marie Antoinette, and this diamond, along with the Sancy and the royal blue, would be stolen during the French Revolution. And I swear the French cannot win when it comes to diamonds and the luck surrounding them. Now, unlike the Sancy and the royal blue, this wasn't cut up and resold in some other country. The Regent actually ends up in a house in Paris hidden in the rafters, and it's found after the revolution. So after the diamond was found, it was used as security by the governing bodies created after the revolution, So it was like a financial security thing. Or I guess a good way to put it would be collateral. But then in 1801, it was actually redeemed by Napoleon Bonaparte, who used the gem to embellish the hilt of his sword during his coronation in 1804. However, things don't work out in Napoleon's favor. He's eventually exiled to the island of Elba, and when he is, his second wife, Marie Louise of Austria, took the diamond back to Austria, and later her father, Emperor Francis I of Austria, returned the Regent diamond to France, where it was again to become part of the French crown jewels. So it was part of the crown jewels of the Bourbon Restoration. The Regent diamond appears on the crowns of Louis XVIII, Charles X, and Napoleon III, and then finally it was mounted on a Greek diadem designed for Empress Eugenie, the wife of Napoleon III. So after Napoleon III was defeated at the Battle of Sedan in 1870 and he was deposed by what would become the Third Republic, he and his family, they go into exile in England, and in 1887 the crown jewels were sold at auction, all of them except for the Regent, which was preserved as a national treasure and exhibited in the Louvre, where it has sat ever since. With the exception of World War II, when those jerk-off Nazis occupied France, the diamond was actually sent to a village called Chambord, and in a little chateau it was hidden in there until after the war. It was then returned to the Louvre, where it was put on display in the Apollo Gallery, and that's where it remains to this very day. This is another one of those diamonds where you can't really put a price on it. It's priceless. It's a French national treasure. However, some estimates have valued it at roughly around 48 million pounds. Or if you want to translate that into Freedom Eagles, that's about $61 million. However, it's probably a good idea that this diamond is just on permanent display at the Louvre, because it seems to bring bad luck and misfortune to anybody who handles it, much like all the other diamonds in our little mini-series episode, whatever this was. Now, as we round out our little tales from the world of diamonds, I can't say for sure whether or not any of these diamonds are cursed. They do seem to have fallen into the hands of some people who had experienced some bad luck. And sure, these diamonds were probably a witness to some of that history, especially the Sancy, my god. But are the diamonds cursed? I doubt it. Human nature is weird, especially when gemstones and diamonds are involved. We just have these weird connections to these kind of shiny objects that we know can influence history and change our lives. Now, maybe that may lead to some bad behaviors, which would end up not in your favor and allude to a curse, but who knows? The world is weird, and human nature can just be insane to try to predict. But on that note, I think that's where we'll end it for today. Once again, this is Mike, this is Urban Legends and Mythology, and I thank you for listening. And as always, if you did enjoy this, all I ask is that you maybe tell a friend about this show. Word of mouth really is the most effective way to grow this show, which doesn't really show up very high in a lot of the charts. It's just because it's a niche genre, and the algorithms aren't really all that great to niche genre stuff. So any and all help on that front is always appreciated, as well as all the people out there who are supporting the show through donations or sharing it on social media or whatever. All of that stuff is extremely appreciated. And once again, this is Mike, and I will see you in the next episode.